Okay, so starting off with introductions, my name is Evangeline Arithwala and I'm the Alumni Engagement Officer at the CSE. On behalf of the CSE, I welcome you all to this webinar on International Inter-University Collaboration on Global Climate Change. A very apt topic, I must say, in advance to the COP26 event being hosted here in the UK. This webinar is part of the CSE's Climate Action webinar series. And today I would like to invite our webinar speaker, Ian Rowlands. You may see Ian on the screen, just a quick hello. Ian is the Associate Vice President International at the University of Waterloo in Canada, where he's also the professor in the School of Environment, Resources and Sustainability. Ian has previously worked at the United Nations Collaborating Center on Energy and Environment, and has also worked at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And I'm also pleased to say that he has also held visiting positions at the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Ian is a 1987 Commonwealth Scholar from Canada. And on behalf of all of us present today in this webinar, I would like to welcome Ian. Over to you, Ian, with your presentation, and good luck for your presentation.
Great, Eva. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you to you and your colleagues for putting together this outstanding webinar series. My goodness, it's timely and critical. And I'm indeed delighted and honored to be part of it, and very excited to be engaging with alumni and current scholarship holders from around the world as well. Indeed, to all of you out there, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this presentation entitled International Inter-University Collaboration on Global Climate Change. And as Eva noted, I am Ian Rowlands, and I am indeed a CSC alum. And this is what I looked like as a scholarship holder almost 35 years ago now. And that was me back in the day, 22 years old, departing Canada, going to the United Kingdom for graduate work and having an experience that was truly transformative for me. It was during that time in the UK as a Commonwealth Scholar that I found my professional passion. I recognized that the university was where I just found my fit and could do the most impactful work. And I've built my career in the higher education sector since then. I'm forever grateful for that experience. I hope the alum in the crowd today can reflect similarly upon their own experiences, and so excited for the current scholarship holders as well, what they're doing. And I hope they're going through positively transformative experience as well. I've hinted at the professional impact on that time in the UK. I'll say on the personal side, it was transformative as well. Indeed, lifelong passions for hiking, South Asian food, and European football all got their start in the UK 35 years ago. Let me begin by inviting you to reflect as we honor the land and the Indigenous heritage of the place on which I'm located as a University of Waterloo speaker today here in Canada. The University of Waterloo acknowledges that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the lands granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building. And I make this acknowledgement today, recognizing that it's only part of a commitment to reconciliation, and I commit to do more. And I invite you, wherever you are in the world today, to reflect upon issues of importance to you. Let's start today by seeing who is in the virtual room. So we've got a series of 5 polling questions for you. And the first one for you today is, where in the world are you calling in from? And you've got a number of choices there: the UK, rest of Europe, Africa, Asia, Australasia, Latin America and Caribbean, or North America. And be delighted just to give it a second or two just to see where we have our people calling in from today. So good, just another second, please feel free to jump in where you're sitting today. And I'm 7:30 here in the morning in Canada as I'm looking out at sort of twilight as the sun is rising. And great answers are coming in. So it looks like a slight majority sitting in the UK, but literally all around the world, Africa, Asia, and Australasia as well. Perhaps we can go on to the next question whenever you're ready, Eva.
Yeah. We could move the slide to the next one to feature the question before I launch.
Good. And the next question is for you to choose the decade of your CSC award. I've already revealed my answer would have been a 1980s, but we'll see the extent to which we have alum in the crowd and the extent to which we have some current scholarship holders in the crowd as well. Delighted we've got some people reaching back to the 70s, a decade like mine in the 80s, and then a number of you from the 2010s and the 2020s as well. Great to see that coming in. And whenever you want to prompt me for the next question, Eva.
Yes, I've just shared the responses with the attendees. I'm about to stop sharing, and then we're ready for the next question.
Great. And I will do the next question. And the next question asks about what kind of occupation, what kind of professional position do you occupy? So we've got choices there about students, those working in higher education, those working in government, civil society, private sector, or another category that we haven't captured well by the elements above. And it's great to see some answers coming in, a lot in higher education, be that as a student or working in it, but a broad cross section as well. And now that I know the rhythm, I'll wait for Eva to post the results whenever she thinks appropriate, and she can let me know when she shared it with you and what's the next slide.
Yes, the result is now being shared. I'll just wait for a couple of seconds for attendees to gauge the responses. Looks like we do have majority of current scholars in our attendees today. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am now ready to launch the next poll question.
Great. And last couple of questions, just ask you for a self-reflection. And this first one of the two, how would you rate your understanding of global climate change? And we've got a Likert scale there from the very high to the very low. And yeah, so feel free to jump in. And I see that the responses are coming in, which is great. Some knowledge of global climate change. And to be clear, no prior knowledge is expected in this webinar whatsoever. And I'm hoping no matter where you are on this scale, you'll get something from it, and looking forward to engage in this discussion. But Eva, over to you.
Yes, I've just shared the responses now, Ian. Seems like we do have attendees with medium or high knowledge. And as you said, no prior knowledge is required. I'm going to stop sharing the results now and over to the next question.
Wonderful. And our final question is, how would you rate your understanding of the university sector and what universities do? And again, we've got the similar scale from very low to very high. And a number of you we saw, Eva, from an earlier question, a number are based in higher education as students or working. And interesting that one of the comments I'll make during this discussion is there's the specialized work within higher education, and then the broader work as well. And Eva, I'll pass it over to you to take it from here.
Yes, so the results are now being shared on the screen for the attendees. And let's give it a couple of seconds, and I am now stopping sharing the results. Over to you now, Ian.
Fantastic. So a wonderful broad sense of understanding. And again, be it in climate or be it in university sector, no prior knowledge expected. And I think one of the wonderful opportunities in this webinar is a sharing of our understandings, our knowledge, and our questions as well. So I will just get myself set here. I'm just going to close that, and I'm going to go on to the next slide and just say a little bit about the content of what I'd like to dig into today. And as Eva said at the beginning, I've got a presentation for about another 30, 35 minutes, something like that. Please feel free to think of comments and questions along the way. And I'm delighted that we'll have about 15 minutes or so at the end to engage Eva, you and I in a conversation. Hear your comments and perspectives, and as well to if there's questions you want to put to me, I'd be delighted to try to answer them as well. And this webinar today focuses upon the ways in which universities worldwide are making contributions to addressing the challenges of global climate change. And that's both individually and collectively at the international level. And to do this, I'm going to present some slides and information that follow these 5 themes in order. The first, a little bit about climate change, a reminder for us, talk a little bit about it as one of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'll then go on to talk about universities and talk about their contributions individually following their off-cited 3 missions in research, learning, and service. And I'll also talk a little bit about their operations, because interestingly, they are living laboratories. In a lot of ways, they're like small cities or towns, and perhaps they can do innovative things that others can follow. Third, I'll move on to take it to the international level and look at networks and other kinds of collaborations. Fourth, I'll give you some comments about what I'm seeing as a few of the key challenges and opportunities in this space. Admittedly, coming from my position as in higher education, I wear a few hats. I'm an administrator. I'm also a researcher. I'm also a teacher at times still as well. And then finally, we'll open it up to talk about some action items going forward, and that will segue us into a broader conversation, which I'm looking forward to. So to begin, just a little bit of a reminder of the multiple dimensions of the climate challenge, the climate action challenge and opportunity that exists in the world. And I've got a couple of images here. On the left-hand side, I've got an image from one of the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So this is the IPCC, and I've put up the title, the cover of the Working Group 1, the Physical Science Basis, to give you a sense of this phenomenon called global climate change is indeed occurring around us right now. And with our best understanding of models and so on, we can look into the future, how it will continue to occur given present projections and possibilities. IPCC has a second working group called Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability, and that speaks to the reality of climate change is real now, and societies, all of us around the world, have to react to it and broadly call it adapt. And the third working group from the IPCC is called Mitigation of Climate Change. Emission reductions, capture of carbon emissions by other means, and so on. We've got to, that trajectory of emissions going up have to be bent down in a dramatic way. I'll come back to in a second. And the right-hand side is the SDG 13 slogan, label, image, if you wish. In full, SDG 13, one of the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And there are 5 targets associated with that to create action to combat climate change. Just to set the context further, I pulled out 3 things that are probably front of mind for many of us. Eva mentioned COP26 in Glasgow starting this weekend. So the annual coming together of the global community to reflect upon the ways in which the international agreements are catalyzing collective action on climate change and the urgency of what they need to do there. The success of the Paris Accord 6 years ago, needing to build upon that and indeed get the emissions reduced, adaptation efforts, international finance efforts, a whole set of issues on the agenda there. And I'll just say, sitting here in North America, storms and extreme weather we've seen, that reality of climate change that is existing already. And then the third of 3 on this slide, I'll just flag, is what came out a couple of days ago. The UN Environment Programme issued its annual emissions gap report. They do an inventory of countries' emissions of greenhouse gases from around the world and reflect upon Is this going to allow us to achieve the Paris target of 1.5 degrees? And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said, no, this was another, quote, thundering wake-up call that we're not on the right path. The UNEP study said we're headed on a course to hit 2.7 degrees if indeed those commitments that countries have made are in fact sincere. So the work at Glasgow, the work in Waterloo, the work in the various places you are must continue, and it's urgent. Let me now go on and talk a little bit about universities, and because we do need responses from everyone with regard to combating climate action, to addressing climate change across the science, the adaptation, the mitigation as well. And I start by talking about research. Universities do research, and I'd like to argue this is critical in the response to global climate change. Across these domains I've talked about, climate science, adaptation, and mitigation, we need pure research, often called discovery research. We need applied research as well. We need this research to be disciplinary. We need this research to be transdisciplinary. And we certainly need people to come together and put their best talent on these challenges and opportunities. I've just pulled out a data point here from my home university in Canada, and I went on to a bibliometric source, SciVal and Scopus, and said, okay, if I put in climate change, what's Waterloo doing? And what this says to me, as I see the most cited articles look at things like electric vehicles, tourism, green materials, macroeconomics, and batteries across subject areas like environmental science, energy, social sciences, engineering, earth, and planetary sciences. I'd like to think that shows you the depth and breadth of research going on at the University of Waterloo and many of the universities around the world as well. So research, I would argue, is an important contribution of universities to global climate change challenge. And learning is very important as well. We've been entrusted, and universities, higher education worldwide, with many of the leaders of tomorrow. These are the students we have today will be the workers of the world, the citizens of the planet. And many of us argue that climate change is so pervasive that all of them need an understanding of it, at least at a fundamental level, so that the actions they take in their professional work going forward and their citizen life going forward can serve to mitigate global climate change and to adapt to the same. So many arguments going on in universities. How do we provide a pervasive understanding of this critical issue, because it affects every part of society? And then for some of our students, it will be really important that they learn to a greater depth in a variety of disciplinary and transdisciplinary areas. They are the agents of change. We are all the agents of change, but the students we are teaching, those of us in higher education, and those of you in higher education who are the students, you're going to be critical agents of change going forward. So we need to equip you with an understanding of this complex yet critical issue. So getting climate change on universities' agendas in this broad and deep way is really important and is happening as well. A third area here, I'll talk about universities' operations. I hinted in my introductory comments that universities are living laboratories. They are like little towns. As I look at my university, a community of 40,000 people, people work here, people sleep here, people eat here. We've got support services in terms of health, in terms of security, all sorts of things you would have in a town. So an opportunity to learn by doing, to be a living laboratory, to set an example as well. And what I've pulled out here is just from a report from my university called Shift Neutral, where we lay out our roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2050. And I've just pulled out a little bit of the broader timeline and the broader journey we lay out, just to show you that at universities, we are doing things that society needs to do and is doing. So we're learning from society and hopefully contributing back as well. Number one there, energy efficiency. Often people say the low-hanging fruit in what society can do. Improving energy efficiency is one of the most cost-effective ways of mitigating global climate change. Bringing in a low-carbon fleet, and some people may think, oh, well, that sounds expensive, doesn't it? Here in my community, the taxi cabs have gone lower carbon for many years now because it's been cost-effective for them. And then as you get to number 5, 6, and 7, you're thinking about in number 5, the capital investment. When renewal comes, thinking not necessarily for the cheapest capital cost, but thinking for the lowest operating cost in a broad perspective of impact. And that's when you'll get the climate friendlier choices being made. Number 6 and 7, pushing the envelope and leading by example, having your systems be more innovative and the best in class that you choose. And indeed, in number 7, maybe doing things different and transforming the paradigm. Instead of simply subscribing to the centrally provided electricity system narrative, let's transform it a bit, or at least supplement it with some distributed generation of electricity as well. So I like that universities around the world are doing things, and this has this inward-looking element, this getting learnings from society element, and then learning back to society as well. And universities have this third mission as well. And universities are looking at the ways in which they can contribute to their society's economic and social missions more broadly. They do so through research, providing innovation, discovery, new knowledge. They do so through learning, providing these agents of change and leaders as well, but more direct engagement as well through things like thought leadership, media commentary, serving on expert panels for government, industry, civil society, doing joint projects with partners in community as well. And I've pulled out imagery here from organization, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, a global organization affiliated with the United Nations. And we're proud here in Waterloo, we lead the Canadian chapter of it. And they're really focused upon developing a Sustainable Development Goals research agenda for Canada, cultivating high quality education, galvanizing support throughout the country to achieve the SDGs. So working with many other universities in Canada, but also research institutes, NGOs, foundations, and others as well. Bringing together others and being a I was going to say a safe space, an effective space for collaboration between, sometimes people often call it town and gown, for the many parts of our society that need to address climate change. And indeed, my next slide brings out SDG 17, which those of you who know the SDGs is about partnerships. And universities can play a key role in connecting with others, in bringing together multiple perspectives, be that interdisciplinary, be that intersectoral, be that international as well. And I'll dig into the international in just a moment. But universities I feel it's an obligation we have. I think the pandemic, and we can discuss this if people want, the pandemic has shown the ability of universities to react, and societies are wanting universities and others to react and play leadership, catalyzing roles to address these grand challenges we have in our society today. And diversity in thought, diversity in strategizing, diversity in action has many times been shown to be critical to successful outcomes, to having impact as well. We get multiple perspectives, we get multiple experiences, we get to draw upon multiple knowledge bases, we get we are able to build better ways forward, many of us believe, and universities can be an important part of that. And indeed, that's a nice segue to move on to talk a little bit in the next part of my presentation discussion with you today about the ways universities are connecting internationally. And we've done some work here at Waterloo with our friends in Buffalo in the United States and in Madrid in Spain as well, doing an inventory, a perspective of how are universities working together globally? And we found that there are a number of global networks of universities out there. We've found more than 30 that claim that their focus is addressing climate change, and more and more are arising virtually. I was going to say every day, that's probably over dramatic, but certainly every year. There's motivations for them to do so, obviously. I talked about the value of diversity and multiple perspectives. It can allow them to increase their own prominence in the world, which then may allow them, the individual university, to access other partners, to access other resources, to access other ideas as well. And universities, many of them, mine included, are instinctively international. We've got international students, we've got international faculty members, international staff. So there's that natural tendency, which is fantastic, to connect in the world as well. As we looked at these 30 networks, we saw they're doing a lot of fantastic work, and their sharing of their experiences of what they're doing on campus was where we thought they had a lot of impact. And that's probably understandable because that's within their remit. They've got their university, their own property as a living laboratory, and they can report on that. Where maybe they have less impact is their influence upon policy. And perhaps that's understandable because working in a global network, when policies can be a function of regional conditions, national conditions, it may be hard to compare and contrast to do collaborative work in that way. I can certainly think that the comparative work would be effective, but maybe building a larger, say, lobbying effort might be more difficult. The recommendation coming out of this report from colleagues across these 3 universities was certainly to highlight the importance of these networks, and to note in particular as well that we should use them as efficiently and effectively as possible. We shouldn't create them for the sake of creating them, but instead we should be creating them to fill gaps. We should be supporting those that are seen to be successful as well. And the work continues here. And indeed, I'll be drawing upon a few examples here that speak to some of these more than 30 networks that I mentioned in this, that are mentioned in this report. So now I've got just a couple of slides to talk a bit about how are universities working together with respect to addressing the global climate change challenge. Well, back to the missions of the university I talked about previously, research. They are coming together and conducting research. And I draw upon some work that I've done here with colleagues in the United Kingdom and Switzerland as well. And this had its genesis from a national network of universities. It was called the Energy Storage Technologies Network and was supported by our national funder here in Canada, NSERC. And that network wanted explicitly to internationalize, so it linked up with colleagues in the UK. And so through the collaboration of their network and our network, individual connections were made. And I was delighted to make a connection with Dr. Christopher Jones at the University of Surrey. And we developed a friendship and a relationship, and then saw value in comparing our understandings of social acceptance on energy storage systems. That's what we do, to do a comparative study across Canada and the UK. So we investigated what's going on with regard to people's attitudes towards energy storage. Energy storage, many say, is an important element in the energy transition we need to make to address global climate change. And we found some similarities. We found a general comfort level with those technologies that are known, pump storage in particular, batteries as well. And those that were somewhat newer, compressed air and flywheels, didn't attract as much attention. But if people trusted the communicator who gave them information about these new technologies, they were more likely to be accepting of that in a general sense. Accepting in the sense of if their local municipality then decided, oh, we'd like to do a pilot project in our community, they might well be accepting of it. In research we've done, we've seen the importance of this communication. We've seen the importance of having trusted facilitators in energy storage projects and in transformative energy projects generally. So this is just one example of some international research being done. We built the methodology together. We did our own surveying within our two countries, the 1,000 people in each of the two countries, and came back together and reflected upon our results and thought about how we could communicate those to our respective communities and decision makers as well. An example of some international research. Let me go and talk about international networks of learning and how we're connecting and learning. And this is sort of a pandemic message as well. Generally, as was mentioned by Eva and many of you know as well, COP26 is opening this weekend in Glasgow. And in non-pandemic times, I think the world would have expected 40,000 people to arrive in Glasgow. And a number of those people would have been from higher education, be that faculty members, be that professional services staff, or be that students. And indeed, here at Waterloo, we would have been part of that cohort. Every year, we send a group of faculty, staff, and students to the annual COP. Well, because of outbound travel restrictions, because of the global pandemic, we didn't do that this year, but wanted to engage in other ways. So we are still sending our delegates virtually. And then with our good friends at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, we've connected with 6 universities around the world in Canada and the UK, and also Sweden, China, Malawi, and South Africa to bring together groups of students and early career researchers to compare perspectives on climate change. So this is a co-curricular activity, but one we feel is really important to learning in the university setting. Once a month for 5 months, the groups will come together for about 2 hours. There's about 120 of them in total, 20 from each of the 6 universities. They'll share videos that they've produced, short videos that speak to some aspect of climate change from their local perspective, and then see the ways in which they can learn from others and inform others in a cross-cultural setting. So we're excited by this. We've had the kickoff session. It was very successful, and seeing the ways in which that bringing together a network of universities in that way can be meaningful for the students in so many ways, their learning, their leadership opportunities, and so on. Let me go on and talk about another example. And Eva, I'm delayed. I get to draw upon my time last year at the Association of Commonwealth Universities, which was another transformative moment for me as I was on sabbatical from Waterloo and got to work with colleagues at the ACU. I smile as I describe it to friends back here in Canada. I say, I often tell my students the importance of international education. You go abroad, you get new perspectives. Well, I did that as someone 30 years beyond my last degree. I did it afresh as a 50-something, and very grateful for that opportunity. And one of the great learnings was engagement in the ACU's Commonwealth Climate Resilience Network, a network led by 3 universities in the global south in the small island developing states. That's the University of West Indies, the University of South Pacific, and Fiji National University. And for me, as I helped the team at the ACU facilitate the good work that this network is doing, I was grateful for getting a new perspective on what climate resilience meant to them, very much looking at the ways in which their universities need to be resilient in both physical infrastructure ways to climate change, think of extreme events in these parts of the world, and in the sense of the institutional delivery of the university's mandate as well. And they shared information amongst themselves. They exchanged students amongst themselves, and they were having a big impact as well. And the ways in which many of us work to then integrate the many others beyond this leadership team from these 3 universities was fascinating and instructive. And indeed, I think trailblazing for thinking about the ways in which networks can advance and have impact in our world. I'd like to bring you to another global network, and this is one that's housed here at the University of Waterloo and then has its reach around the world. And as part of our Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy, we've got a coalition called the Affordable Energy for Humanity, which is made up of groups with partners in 34 countries working together to get a just transition and access to clean energy for all. And they've been working with partners locally to find out what is the agenda that makes most sense within the different parts of the world, and then the ways in which higher education and educational institutions broadly can play a role for advancing that. Engaging students in education about energy transitions, just energy transitions, engaging students in leadership positions in order to participate in innovation with small startups, with small civil society organizations, with any size of organization around the world to move us forward in a just energy transition. Speaking very much more to that service element, but it does integrate the learning and the teaching elements as well. So I've got those were a couple of examples about the various networks that are out there, things that I've aware of, things that our university here at the University of Waterloo touches. And I've got a few slides at the end now before we'll open it up to questions in a few minutes. And this first one, I guess I'll leave rhetorical, and people can come back to it even in the discussion if they want. I'd be really interested in thinking about regarding climate action. I've got two questions here. Where do universities have their greatest impact, and where do they have their greatest potential? And I ask these questions explicitly. I'm selfishly as well. I'm seeking to inform my own work here at the University of Waterloo and in my own international networks around the world. The challenge in front of us is urgent. The challenge of climate change is urgent. And therefore, I want to do my best to deploy the resources, the talent, the skill set, the time of university people, infrastructure, and so on to where it can have the most impact. And I feel really strongly about that it's not simply the quote photo op or the fun thing. I mean, things need to be enjoyable to continue with motivation and so on. But thinking about, given all these options for university to engage, where can they have their greatest impact? And then the greatest potential element, thinking moving forward. I've presented you with various elements of what is the mission of the university, talking across the research, learning, service, and then the operations or living laboratory. How can they have increased their potential in each of those elements so that the impact I've been talking about can be even greater? And I've got some thoughts, and then I think, Eva, I'll go on to the next slide to put some questions out to people, and then we can transfer to an open discussion whenever you want. But some thoughts I've got here. Again, I've told you I've got these three perspectives as a university member here in Waterloo. I'm an administrator, so I manage a team that manages the international portfolio for the University of Waterloo. I'm a researcher. I've got an active research agenda on the social dimensions of energy transitions. And I'm a teacher as well. I supervise grad students. I do occasional guest lectures. I'm giving a guest lecture with a colleague on energy policy next week. So those different elements, these are three things that I'm finding are really important to me, and I'm trying to move forward. The first one is connecting the levels, and from the local to the global, from the global to the local. My doctorate was in international relations, and back in the day when I did it, it was very much about how these levels were somewhat distinct. The local, the national, the international / global. Certainly there would be specialized connections between them, but I think some 30 years on, there's a much greater appreciation and understanding that things that are done locally, the activities that serve to create global greenhouse gas emissions, for example, have an impact globally. The things that are done locally, demonstration of a new policy that has significant impact upon greenhouse gas emissions, affect the global discourse as well. And similarly, the global affects the local as well. The signals that are sent from Glasgow next week and the week after will be important for the activities done by countries around the world, by individuals around the world as well. So whenever I'm doing things here, I'm thinking about the ways in which we might collaborate with another international university. There will be local activity. I want experiences for our members here at Waterloo, but then I want it to have global impact as well. And similarly, when I think of the global networks we're involved in, I'm thinking about how I can bring that activity down to my campus here and have meaningful change here in whatever way. A second one I've put there is finding common interests or synergies, the importance of being empathetic. I guess I'm thinking very much so. Sometimes we turn on the news and we see division, we see camps forming of different perspectives. We see an unwillingness or a disinterest in listening to others' views. I feel it's important just to reiterate the second message I have there. SDG 17 on collaborations, the multiple perspectives. We need now more than ever a coming together and a frank conversation between across disciplines, across sectors, across communities, across countries to address these challenges that span spatially, span temporally, and span in so many ways. We need to bring disparate perspectives to bear. When I work with colleagues here, I often think about being empathetic. Put yourself in the view of the other you're working with to see how you can find a win-win, some kind of common interest. And then a third one is thinking through the theory of change. And we're all doing activities, we're doing things. If I open up my calendar right now, I'll probably see I've got meetings going on, I'm attending lectures, I'm giving webinars and lectures and so on. And these activities are critical. But many of us are thinking about, okay, these activities, they catalyze outputs and then they catalyze outcomes. So maybe I've got a meeting later today where I'm meeting with my team and we're thinking about how we can incent some international collaboration between our university and another university. We're thinking about how that activity, maybe it's a webinar of some sort, might lead to collaborative research and a research article. And then we're thinking about how that research article can be disseminated appropriately to then change someone's behavior to have an outcome that we're interested in, to make the world a better place. So some people call it a logic model, some people call it a theory of change, going from activities to outputs to outcomes. Not saying it's not an easy journey, and you've got to be nimble and adaptive as you think about that, but very much on the front of my mind as well. So Eva, I've got a couple of questions here. I'm happy to invite you in and sort of say I can put these out metaphorically or whatever you want. I see a number 8 in the chat. I don't know whether questions are coming in, but I'll just read these 3 questions and then I'll invite you to give me some direction as what you think might make sense. So 3 questions I thought to think about all of us. I'd love you to take some action items from this webinar, and I'd love you to think about what can you do to engage with universities better? What can universities do to engage with you better? And what other actions do you want to commit to? And that's in the spirit of going back to the polls at the beginning. We've got a diverse group here. We've got people working in higher education. We've got students. We've got people working in civil society and private sector and government as well. We've got different ages on the call. We've got different parts of the world. And just, I'm encouraging you here to think about how can you enter this web of international, inter-university collaboration and make a meaningful contribution. Then the third bullet point is SDG 13 generally, what can we all do to advance that goal? So Eva, I'll pause there and I'll go to the next slide, and happy to give a summary of my comments I probably already have. So over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your brilliant presentation. I would invite attendees to share their thoughts on the questions that were on the previous slide. And while you do share your thoughts, if attendees do have questions for Ian, please share that in the chat box, and we will bring it up shortly. In the next 5 minutes when we open the Q&A session. But for now, if attendees have any thoughts on the 3 questions, please indicate the question that you are addressing. and also share your thoughts in the chat box. And Ian and I will be happy to look at your responses in the chat and discuss further. Thank you. If you don't want to respond, that's fine as well. We are not forcing you.
Hi, this is Shaheen Begum from Pakistan. I
Hi,
have a
Shaheen.
comment on the second question.
Go for it.
That what the universities can do to engage with you better. So I have had this experience that I got research funded by the Higher Education Commission in our country, and now like the university people in the accounts office, or people in the purchase office, specifically in the accounts office, they are handling the budget of my project, and sometimes it is so hard that I'm chasing them, I'm calling them to sign a check from me, or to forward anything through the university to the funding agency. So it's again a time taking task, and it's sometimes very frustrating, which is not letting me to write like more research projects or funding. So I would like Ian to comment on this, that how the universities can facilitate more in terms of research, the faculty members who are interested in doing the research and who have already brought the funded project to the university.
Wonderful. And Dr. Begum, thank you for your question and greetings to you in Pakistan. Your comments make me think of two things, and one of them is certainly the importance of an infrastructure to support the research. And I know there are conversations around the world in which the value of ensuring that it speaks to, I think, one of my earlier comments. Those who are best equipped to deal with a particular aspect of a challenge should be doing it. That's a very general comment. The more specific is, in my work here at the University of Waterloo, I guess I'm very conscious as our researchers, our faculty, our students, our staff on the front line are the skills that are being brought to bear in the research on global climate change challenge or others. And then the infrastructure. Here at Waterloo, we call them staff, professional services staff. The more we can do to facilitate the activity, so be it an accounts office, mentioned, be it about financial administration and so on as well, the more we can do to facilitate that, make it as seamless as possible, I think we're all playing a good role for that collective work together. Of course, and these are not related to your comments, of course, there has to be accountability, and certain donors or certain funders will want certain missions advanced and so on. And we're seeing that increasingly here in Canada as well. The ways in which from our national granting bodies, an expectation that it will contribute to the well-being of our communities at different scales and translating the knowledge into society. So those are just quick reactions on number one. And number two, I think I'll say a plug for the ACU here is in the sense of networking amongst peer universities. I believe, Eva, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a community of practice, that may be a wrong term, in sort of reconnecting research offices globally to share good practice. And one hopes that through networks like this, connecting, they can do two things, at least two things. They can share tips, and they can also share best practice for inspiration. So I'm thinking more generally on the first thing, there may be, oh, are you aware of this new technical tool that is helpful? And on the second thing, oh, are you aware that there are broader expectations about doing X, Y, and Z? And that can help local champions then move their tasks forward. So Dr. Begum, those are just a couple of reactions, and Eva, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much for responding to that, and thank you, Begum, for sharing your question with us.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Shahab from UK, from Essex.
Yes, hi, Shahab, go ahead.
Thank you for nice presentation, Professor. You have mentioned so many things very useful for the universities to rethink their thinking about climate change and other issues. Number one thing is that the developing country like Bangladesh and other countries, they stick with the traditional syllabus. And I would like to, for example, if I would like to introduce these are the issues in the syllabus, but the authority will not allow me to do that. That's the number one obstacle. Number two, the entrepreneurs, those who would like to coming forward, bringing these issues in their agenda and finding new ways to solve the energy problem and other problems. But the entrepreneurs are also, profit oriented. They would like to go the projects and the products that will give them more profit. So we need to think about how can we encourage them, motivate them to come forward in the energy sector and the climate change issues in their project and the products. So these are the two main thing. And one thing that is circular economy, that what I am studying now in the University of Essex. So I think circular, if we can introduce the circular economy in our mainstream economy, and if we can think circular way, then that will minimize lots of problem. And furthermore, this is the new concept that are coming out. So a developing country is still not aware about that. So universities can create some syllabus and motivate these students to think circular way. So I think these are the things that can contribute to the universities to rethink their designing their syllabus, and how can motivate the entrepreneurs to design their products so that will not harm the environment. Thank you again. Thank you so much for your nice presentation.
Shahab, thank you very much, and greetings to you in the UK. Briefly on your three comments, and they're wonderful comments, I'll work backwards. The first one, the circular economy. I smiled, Shahab, because I was at my first public lecture last night in person, which was very exciting, first in almost 2 years. And I was seeing be outside a colleague who researches the circular, 2 seats away, researches the circular economy. And the president of our university introduced the speaker, and the president used the term circular economy. And we looked at each other and sort of said, good stuff and everything. So just the role of universities, speaking to your point, bringing new ideas into students' minds. And here, this was a community university public lecture into the broader discourse as well. So I encourage you, I applaud you for your work, and please keep at it most definitely. Secondly, on entrepreneurs, just working backwards, I'm getting the incentives to encourage entrepreneurs to work on the problems that matter. It's a loaded term, as I would judge that they matter is really important. And we see many times that a lot of young talent will be developing the new app to make sure, and ... it may sound a bit trivial. So how can we encourage our students to focus upon those problems that will have that outcome I talked about on the earlier slide? And work in progress here at Waterloo, trying to do some sort of education, and then the broader issue about reconfiguring incentives so that we can align the positive outcomes for the individual with positive outcomes for society as well. And very briefly on the first one, Shahab, your comments made me think about accreditation bodies nationally that require degrees to have certain elements. That can be a tough fight to bring in new thinking there. And it also made me think, you didn't reference it particularly, but promotion and tenure committees as well, looking for traditional disciplinary articles in the top journals. How do we encourage this broader thinking? So there are those structural elements in the university, Shahab, you identified nicely to that need to be addressed. I think conversations like this we'll get the presidents of the universities sort of moving the boundaries as well. Thanks, Eva.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Shahab. Thank you, Ian, for responding to that. I will now, I'm a bit aware of the time. I don't want to overrun by, a very long time. So I will now open the floor to questions for our attendees. Ian, would you like to summarize? I've seen you have a summary slide. So would you like to summarize before we open the floor to questions?
Certainly, I'll just do a very brief summary and just try to give you a sense of the ways in which universities are doing their contributions individually across this research, learning, operations, and service landscape, and then the connections internationally. And not to saying one is more important than the other, but we need that. You've heard me use the term depth and breadth. We need that focused work. We need that connected work to address SDG 13. So an open invitation to you to engage with universities, an open invitation to you if you're in universities to engage with others as well to advance SDG 13. So Eva, back to you.
Thank you. While we do wait for questions to come in the chat box, there are a few thoughts that have come through in the chat box. So do have a look. It's from Aditi and Alice. But we do have a list of questions that have come in advance to your webinar, and I'll be more than happy to bring that forward to you.
Whatever you wish, please feel free to paraphrase a comment in the chat box and I can react to it or point me to it and I'll find it as well, whatever you wish.
Wonderful. So I'll start with a question and then I can go back to the messages that have come in the chat. The first question is funding currently available for inter or intra-university climate change events? If yes, if you could shed some light on the ones that are available.
That's good. So the question of funding is obviously a critical motion because funding can then liberate resources like people's time, supplies, so on and so forth, to then engage in a variety of activities. Eva, I heard the comment about events in particular, and I'm afraid I can't sort of respond explicitly about what events, what funding might be available. I do instinctively think of two things. One is at the municipal level or the local level, the ways in which I'm really seeing, and I think the next 2 weeks with the coverage of Glasgow will allow all of us an opportune time to capitalize upon the attention being brought to bear in the mainstream press, if you can use it that way. That might be a ripe time to go to one's local authorities and sort of say, we need to maintain this momentum and we need to set, like climate change can't be 2 weeks every year and that's it. Climate change concern has to be 52 weeks a year. So this might be a wonderful time to propose a series of events to your local communities that then maintain that momentum going forward. And the second thing I'll say is to engage universities in it, because again, this is, I didn't elaborate on it a lot. I think a pandemic learning that universities, we've all been transformed by the pandemic of the last year and a half. And I think universities, if I can make a broad generalization, really seeing their need to show their accountability to their communities and they're wanting to do it as well. So not only the convergence of Glasgow and using that momentum, but also universities saying, as we open up again, we're not going back to 2019. We've all learned too much. So we're going to think more purposefully about that so-called third mission of service. So maybe they can be a key partner in the events as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your response on that, Ian. I would now like to invite Alice to please unmute and share your thoughts with Ian.
Thank you very much, Ian, for quite an insightful presentation and it was quite thought-provoking. I am from Eswatini. I work with civil society organizations, and I don't know in other countries, but my experience is that civil society organizations are very much on the ground with what is happening and all the effects that are happening with climate change, compared, not that I'm discrediting, compared to government institutions and private sector. And They do collect a lot of raw data, or there's a lot of data that is collected through the work, and some of it is actually not documented, maybe because of lack of expertise or time. But I have not seen much of partnership with universities and civil society, particularly in my country here, to utilize that data when they're doing research, because instead of going to fund new data collection processes, there is already a lot of data that is amassed that could be used. And as I noted, of course, there could be a challenge of funding for them to go to civil society organizations if they're struggling with funding opportunities. But I think that is something very possible and can be utilized in climate change data gathering. I don't know what you think.
Alice, thank you for that, and greetings to you. I think it's a fantastic point, and I thank you for raising it. And in my own work here in Ontario, the province of Ontario in Canada, we've worked with communities and worked with civil society organizations to bring to bear the interests of each upon them. And it will speak. I'd love to hear more about your perspectives at some point and so on, but I'd like to think it speaks to my point about empathy I made earlier, the importance of each partner, civil society and university, understanding the interests, the motivations, the rewards, the whatever you want to say of the other. And you almost need a coming together over a good cup of tea or something and sort of a frank discussion. This is what is success in our eyes. And it will be different for the two sets of players. And then the challenge, and I think it's a challenge worth pursuing, is finding that synergy. Sometimes we call it the sweet spot of the mutual interest. And we found that in our work here in Waterloo, and I'm hoping or thinking, Alice, you may have or could do so in your own work as well. And it will certainly be the case that, yes, the academics have their metrics that they need to perform too, and civil society organizations as well. But through applied research, through mutual respect and clear communication, they can find a common goal together. And in the ones that have worked well for us, the civil society organization has provided our students with outstanding experiences and new perspectives for our students. At the same time, we've provided, because we've brought a particular research methodology, with civil society with maybe a more forceful white paper or statement than they otherwise would have had. And when they take that to, in the case I'm thinking of, their local government, all of a sudden, when you see co-authored between a civil society organization and the university, that is received in a certain way. And I'm not saying that civil society doesn't do good work on its own, no stretch of that at all, but each bringing to bear their own particular perspective. And Alice, the wealth of data you and your colleagues must have, I think researchers would be very interested in that. And then I'd certainly encourage the frank conversation of mutual respect and clear communication to see how that win-win could be found. But thank you very much, Alice, for raising that.
Wonderful. A couple of interesting questions that are coming through. I'd like to ask you one. Do you see sustainable manufacturing strategies in the circular economy, such as remanufacturing, having an impact in combating climate change?
Great question. Thank you for that, Eva, on behalf of whoever delivered it. I certainly think I'll say yes and no. And one reaction on this is the devil is often in the detail, if you will. So the yes element, thinking about the ways in which the way you phrased it, Eva, made me think of ideas like industrial ecology and so on, made me think of industrial symbiosis, made me think of the ways in which industry can work effectively to achieve sustainable manufacturing through mimicking nature, through life cycle analysis, a number of tools we have. But then the no side, and the sort of the devil is in the detail as well. It makes me think of, for example, in some areas, there might be a reuse that is an energy intensive process if that energy comes from solar power or small scale hydro or hydropower, whatever, that might be a good thing. If that energy comes from coal-fired power stations, unequivocally, that is not a good thing. So really looking at that holistic understanding of it, I've talked about the environmental elements here. You could talk about the social elements and the impacts upon peoples and that just transition I was talking about earlier as well. So certainly encourage consideration of it, but as I often do, and many of us in a university setting do, dig deep into the evidence and see if you can, what's the best argument against it, what's the best argument in favor of it, and how, where do you land in your assessment? Thanks, Eva.
Great. One last question from Neelam, who is asking, could you comment on how can we address the gap between fresh Commonwealth graduates finding a place in public or private sector after graduation? She believes that most people find it hard to find employment, especially in third world countries, and finding the right place to contribute towards a positive change. So what are your thoughts on that?
Hi, Neelam, thank you for that question. That's excellent. As a parent of 3 children between the ages of 18 and 24, certainly recognize the excitement the generation is facing, the next stages of their lives, their professional lives, but the challenges that are there as well. Employability is part of the discussion around higher education now. Many of us feel employability is certainly important as well, but it's got to be complemented with a broad skill set, a broad appreciation as well, because employability might simply react to the conditions we have now. And we all know the conditions we have now can't go on as they are. We can't have business as usual. That's what the conversation in Glasgow is all about during the coming 2 weeks. And as I've argued, beyond that as well. So we need that combination of the employability now, but also the creativity to transition, to move to where we need to be. What does that mean, Neelam? I guess in a way that means doing well in your conventional coursework, because that will probably speak to the employability of some elements, but then thinking about the ways in which you've got this broader skill set. Sometimes people call them transferable skills, power skills, whatever you want to call them, because they are the ones that are going to activate creative thinking. They're the ones that are going to coalesce coalitions for change. They're the ones that are going to continue to motivate change agents to move things forward. And that could well be in a series of innovative activities within your classroom. The simulation you did in your class on the national policy on climate change. Yes, you learned about the difference between a renewable portfolio standard and a feed-in tariff, but you also understood how side payments might be an important way in breaking out of inertia. And it was through that simulation that you got that entity. And then after hours in higher education, maybe your co-curricular activities in culture and sports and whatever the case may be, brought you into connection with a much more diverse group of people. You developed your skills of empathy, you developed your skills of understanding of where other people are coming from, and you developed your skills of problem solving and team building through those sorts of elements as well. And then out in the world as well, if you are, Neelam, a university student now, engaging in your community at various scales, and seeing where you fit and you can make a difference as well. I won't underestimate the challenge for all of you around the world, most definitely. And for what it's worth, my colleagues and I understand it and are working to understand what equips you well to be those agents of change. Thanks, Eva.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a very interesting response to that question, Ian. With this, I will be closing the question and answer session now. Unfortunately, I will have to cut this short, but thank you so much to the attendees who have shared their questions in the chat box. I would like to let you know that Ian is more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. So do feel free to connect with Ian on LinkedIn and ask your questions or discuss this topic further. I am sharing Ian's LinkedIn profile link in the chat box for everyone. Please copy that and yeah, please feel free to connect with Ian for further discussions. Ian, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation and sharing your work and expertise with us. It was so nice to hear about the need for international networks, especially within higher education, to collaborate and connect with each other, not just to learn but also to work together to combat global climate change. It's been really interesting, and I'm also pleased to know or to inform you that we do have a few Commonwealth alumni who are attending the current COP26 event in their own professional capacity through their own universities. So yeah, that's another great thought to know that we do have Commonwealth scholars and alumni who will be present at the event. And also it links back to your presentation in terms of bringing various stakeholders within the higher education sector together internationally and nationally as well. So thank you once again for your presentation, and thank you to all our attendees who have joined us today. I think it wouldn't have been, and Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it wouldn't have been possible to have this wonderful interactive session without your interactions and without your thoughts and response to the poll questions and questions in the chat box. So thank you so much for participating in the session today. Thank you, Ian. Any final notes?
Just thank you, Eva, to you and your colleagues for a wonderful series, and delighted to participate today. And thank you to all the participants. What great questions, conversations, ideas, and it's been a pleasure and a delight. And maybe we'll see you in the virtual world or the higher education world at some point in the future. Thank you very much, Eva, and thank you to everyone.
Definitely. And I have seen a few questions on the webinar recording. Yes, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on CSE's YouTube channel shortly. And we will notify you on the CSE 6 Knowledge Hubs and various publications. But yes, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with everyone shortly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ian. Have a great, wonderful day, everyone. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.